Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Printed Circuit Podcast, where we discuss trends, challenges, and opportunities across the printed circuit engineering industry. I'm your host, Steph Chavez. In this episode, we'll focus on Ultra High Density Interconnect, also known as UHDI. Here to join me is my good friend and industry subject matter expert, Anay Vardia, CEO of American Standard Circuits. Thanks for being here, Anay.
Thanks, Steph, for having me on another episode of your podcast. It's always fun to chat with you about different topics, so go for it.
Like you said, you've been on the podcast before, but for those who are new listeners, can you give our audience a brief introduction of yourself and American Standard Circuits?
So, I'm Anay Vardia. I'm the CEO of American Standard Circuits. We're headquartered in West Chicago, Illinois, and we have two divisions. One is based in West Chicago, Illinois, and the other is based in Malino, Oregon. We take pride in being the ultimate PCB provider for the industry and have a range of technology offerings, quality certifications, and we also pride ourselves at supporting our customers through the entire product lifecycle, from initial prototypes all the way to full-scale production.
I really like what you guys are doing there at ASC and the content you guys are putting out. I gotta say, I love your ebooks that you guys put out with 007. They are amazing. Those DFM books or those manufacturing books that you guys produce, the content is gold.
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, we really appreciate it. I mean, one of our goals, to be honest with you, as a company is to really educate the industry and to really work with the design community, because what we believe in at the end of the day is collaborate to win. And so as part of our collaboration, we want to make sure that designers are really well educated about the nuances of printed circuit board manufacturing, because at the end of the day, you can do anything on a computer screen. But the trick lies in taking what you've done as a designer on the computer screen and translating it to a fully fabricated product. So we try to facilitate that and try to collaborate so that we minimize some of the pain along the way and that we're working on win-win solutions to get your product to market.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think as I progressed in my career, one thing that became very evident is that as a designer, especially as you master the skill set of PCB design and master the craft, is understanding the impact at the point of design and the ripple effects has downstream, specifically in fabrication and assembly. If you're not having those early partnership discussions from the very get-go and including those external stakeholders in the project, you're going to lose the war. I know you and I have had very positive discussions on that strong collaboration between fabrication and engineering upfront. I want to get into this ultra high density interconnect or UHDI content. So can you tell us what exactly is UHDI technology and why is it so buzzworthy right now?
Ultra HDI technology, which a lot of people call UHDI, is definitely a buzzword in the North American industry today. Having said that, Ultra HDI is not new. Unfortunately, the US gave up technology leadership here to Asia many, many years ago. We have again started talking about it because there's a large number of defense programs and I think projects where customers are really concerned about their IP and are starting to look for US sources. So as the global circumstances have changed in the last few years, we have seen the CHIPS Act that's starting to put a lot of money for manufacture of semiconductor chips in North America. There's also a lot of push in terms of really developing and managing the Ultra HDI requirements in North America. I would define Ultra HDI as projects that have microvias that are 75 microns or less, lines and spaces that are 50 microns or less, and dielectric thicknesses that are typically in the 50 micron range or below. So that's kind of a very quick definition of the projects or the products that would end up in this Ultra HDI space.
That's really tiny. I mean, you're talking about a human hair or smaller. You're getting real small, fine tracing space. And like you said, you can design on your computer anything, but the question is can it be built? And can it be built with quality and for production quantity? And that's the key. I know that recently you had some discussions at SMTI as you participated on that panel discussion that was hosted and moderated by Tara Dunn. Can you share with us a little bit of the audience give us a summary for those of us who didn't get the opportunity to attend the conference or at least to hear that panel?
So I think one of the key things that we were trying to do was to really educate the industry on the entire supply chain that is associated with Ultra HDI technology. So it's not enough to be able to just fabricate the boards, right? But you have to be able to fabricate the boards. I mean, obviously, you have to design it, right? Which is probably, realistically speaking, the easier of all of the tasks, right? But you have to be able to design it. You have to be able to fabricate the board. And then once the board's fabricated, you also need to be able to assemble the board. And so we were really talking about that entire supply chain and what are some of the key things that have to be done for us to be successful in North America. I mean, granted, all of this has gone on in Asia for many years, but it is new in North America. And we all need to change our thinking processes. We need to change the way we're controlling our processes, the process controls. Many of the manufacturing techniques we use need to change in order for us to be successful at Ultra HDI. So that's a little bit of kind of what we spend time talking about at the Ultra HDI symposium at SMTAI when we had the roundtable.
From what I read going into that show, that I was going to be a good topic, and especially I knew I was going to do the podcast with you as a follow up, so it's really good. So, can you tell me what are the design advantages of using UHDI?
Sometimes, as you've got an end product, you've got what I would say tight space requirements, and you have to fit in a certain amount of capability from a product delivery perspective, and it has to fit in a very small space. And sometimes the only way to get that done is using this Ultra HDI technology because there's no other way to meet the space constraints. That's obviously just one example of some of the design advantages of using Ultra HDI. Again, anytime one needs to utilize a zero point 0.8 millimeter, a sub zero point 0.8 millimeter BGA, you're going to be forced into Ultra HDI technology. There is no other way to route a sub zero point 0.8 millimeter BGA unless you are utilizing Ultra HDI. You know, in many cases, you may be able to lower layer counts if you use the Ultra HDI technology. And there are also applications where a lot of times when you use Ultra HDI technology, you end up with straight sidewalls. So typically your circuit lines are trapezoidal in shape. But if you think about the fact that if your circuit line is rectangular in shape as opposed to trapezoidal, then very quickly you can have some improved RF performance, you can have improved controlled impedance performance. And again, if your application requires it and requires that tight a level of control, then this is a good application again to utilize the Ultra HDI technology. Again, as a designer, if you're really wondering, you know, whether an Ultra HDI technology makes sense in a particular application or not, I really advise you to, again, work with your fabricator, right? Work with somebody that's got to build what you're trying to design and put it into reality, and work with them on, okay, what is the best design features? What is the best way for me to get to from where I am to what we need to do? I mean, there are many cases where we've spent 2 or 3 months back and forth on the phone with some of our customers to get to a design that is truly buildable by us. So again, I mean, I think that upfront collaboration, very, very important as we are marching down this path.
I agree with you. I think that collaboration must happen. I know we will say we highly recommend it, but I think when you're taking to this next step to this advanced complex level, you got to have that external collaboration with your fabricator. That's the key, in my opinion, versus the old back in the day in the legacy way of just throwing it over the wall once the design is complete. Implementing UHDI without collaboration with your fabricator, you're just setting yourself up for major issues to address, which is delays, redos. So you're talking about time and money that's incurred. You could have prevented had you have collaborated earlier. So can you tell me what are the disadvantages of using UHDI?
So I think, like all other technologies, right, you only want to use it if you need it. So we never advise somebody to use a nice, new, neat technology just because. I mean, you really need to have that requirement in order to use it. And as I say that, say you have a 10 layer or a 12 layer board, it's possible to have a couple of layers that utilize Ultra HDI technology and the rest of the layers that don't. Typically, Ultra HDI technology you end up doing sequential builds when you're doing it. So a normal PCB, there's a lot of parallel processing that occurs. I mean, you have a 10, like if you think about a straight up 10 layer board, you got four cores that you're processing simultaneously, right? In parallel, and then you put them all together, you do the outer layer. But in the case of most of the Ultra HDI applications, you're literally sequentially building them. So typically, I mean, what I would say is the lead times will be longer than a traditional 10 layer board just because of the way the processing sequence works and the fact that you're sequencing it through one by one by one. So it's a sequential build. So I think that's one of the bigger disadvantages is just the lead time that's associated with this technology.
That's definitely something that has to be incorporated or you have to take into account is the overall schedule. What is your schedule, the project schedule? What are you up against? And I think this ties back into, are you talking with the fabricator from the beginning so you understand what it's going to take to implement that type of technology in your design? I know you and I have had many discussions on that.
I see at least once or twice a month applications where people are using either HDI or Ultra HDI technology, but with a fair amount of sequential builds. And then you look at their turn time requirements, they're like, oh, I want it in 10 days, you know? So, like, totally unrealistic for the amount of stacking of microvias they want to do and everything else. So, I think sometimes that's the difference between, you know, what's on a computer screen and what the reality of fabrication is.
Designers don't do that. They don't blindly throw stuff over the wall, do they?
Less and less nowadays. I think, you know, as we educate people, I mean, people do understand in a lot of cases that we do need to be mindful of that.
There was a lot of good discussions on this at this year's PCB West. We talked about it there, not just on the show floor, but in the hallways and in some of the different sections, our technical sessions that went on. So it's a great topic. It's a lot of knowledge, especially with American Standards is sharing with the industry. Can you share with us some of the typical applications where UHDI would be implemented on?
Sure. So, you know, the most basic of applications, right, is everybody's got a cell phone nowadays. And most people have smart cell phones, and every single smart cell phone likely has a Ultra HDI board of some sort in this day and age, especially if you have a pretty newer cell phone. I mean, most of the smartphones in the last 4 to 5 years have been using Ultra HDI technology. So that's probably one of the most basic ones. I think camcorders are another one. Some of the more sophisticated camcorders all have Ultra HDI technology in them. The other one's obviously chip scale packaging, right? So in a lot of cases, the semiconductor chip ends up sitting on either a plastic ball grid array or some kind of a chip scale package. And in many of those cases, those chip scale packages are made with PCB technology, but they're all Ultra HDI PCBs. That's yet another application of this technology.
Glad you mentioned that because I think what we're starting to see is the migration of those techniques that were done in the chip world are now migrating over into the design world of the board itself. It's amazing to see how the evolution of PCB design is evolving, you know, with things are getting smaller, more power, or how do you address power? How do you address thermal? You got EMI, EMC from the performance of the board. And then ultimately the DFM, you know, can it be built? You know, is it reliable? Can you build 100? Can you build 1,000 with that level of quality? So it's amazing to see how things are evolving. Can you also share with me or share with the audience here or talk about the manufacturing nuances of this technology?
Sure. So building the finer lines and spaces is only a part of what one of the challenges are, right? But one of the things that we've actually noticed is handling is really critical because you're dealing with thinner materials. We've processed cores with 12 mil dielectric in the core. So if you think about it, that's half a mil. It's almost thinner than a piece of paper, to be honest with you. So I think that's clearly one very critical thing is just handling. Obviously, as the lines and spaces become smaller, contamination is another critical thing, right? So contamination control is something that one needs to be really careful of. We're talking about very tiny microvias. So lasering the microvias is not it's not that difficult. However, making sure they get filled properly because all these vias then have to be copper via filled, that can be a little bit of a challenge for sure. And then the one that not a lot of people think about is solder mask. So typically, what we're seeing is on some of these applications, I mean, you can be as small as a 50 micron opening just for your solder mask pad. Now, that really takes a little bit of help from an imaging standpoint of view. And I think so that's one thing that you don't realize right away as you march down the path of starting to manufacture Ultra HDI circuit boards. You're always thinking about the circuitization. You might be thinking about the microvia sizes, but then, as you get close to the solder mask, you've got some other additional challenges you need to deal with. And then I think part of it is also making sure you have the right inspection and test tools. So part of it is, you need electrical testers now that can test, 25 micron pads,
Exactly.
right? And be able to register to that. So that's another challenge. And then you really need to think about your AOI strategy because you need AOIs that are capable of detecting with very little false calls 12 and 20 micron lines and spaces. I mean, in today's world, you're able to do a lot of things to try to reduce the false calls because some of them are pretty tiny. But now that you have to detect tiny lines, your false call rates start to skyrocket unless you have a strategy to deal with that. So those are just some of the things.
As you were talking, the first thing or what was resonating in my head was if you're a design engineer, whether you're a double E or a PCB designer, or anybody that has to do with printed circuit board development, if you've never been to a fabrication shop, get your butt down there and walk the floor and see the level of detail that's required that goes into it. And I think you shared that a number of times in many of your talks about the importance of truly understanding the fabrication side of all the details. And then now with you have to incorporate what you need to know. And I'd say get your butt over to an assembly shop as well and walk the floor to see truly what it takes to bring your widget to life.
Yeah, I think that's really critical stuff. I mean, I think every designer would do themselves a great favor by walking a fabrication shop, walking an assembly shop, just to see what that simple thing that looks on your computer screen translates to in terms of actually having to manufacture these boards and what some of the real world challenges are, especially as the boards get more challenging from both a design and then a fabrication perspective.
I agree. I agree. Can you tell me, are there any real world projects or any examples in which UHDI is being used today that you can share with the audience?
Yes, I would say, I go back to my cell phone example only because it's something that, people can obviously relate to, right? So, I mean, that's probably one of the more common uses of Ultra HDI technology. And again, unfortunately, most of those are all being manufactured in Asia, right? Nobody's really building those in the US. I mean, at the US, we are using this technology, I would say, for a variety of different industries, medical, aero, industrial. However, most of these applications, or in fact, all of these applications, were under strict NDAs. So it's very difficult to obviously discuss. But needless to say, right, one of the things that I will say is that we are seeing a lot of these applications that are using flex materials. So some of these applications are literally using 12 micron flex materials. We've also seen applications utilizing LCP material. So we do have, some pretty interesting material challenges and different kinds of materials that are being utilized today in the Ultra HDI space.
One of the last questions I want to ask you before we close this out is where would you suggest if a designer is new or a double E is looking to get into or to dive into the technology of UHDI?
So certainly they can reach out to us. John Johnson is our UHDI expert. I mean, he does have an expert page that's on our website, so you can reach out directly to him. You can send an email to sales@asc-i.com and we will respond to you. We do have design guides that are on our website, but again, they're just guides, right? I wouldn't do much with that other than use it as just a preliminary starter. I would really recommend if you want to get into it and do a design, give us a call or contact us. Let's set up a call. We can talk to you about what the different options are, how we can help you on your design. I think that's really, at the end of the day, the best approach, Steph.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And like you mentioned, John Johnson, I collaborated with him on a few projects. What he brings to the table and representing ASC is he's amazing. I think for the audience out there, definitely take advantage of that knowledge that not just he, but they're willing to share. So with that said, Ane, I think that's all that we have time for today. I want to thank you for sharing your insights on UHDI. And to our audience, I want you to continue to tune in for more trends, challenges, and opportunities across the printed circuit engineering industry.